Today on Mass Hysteria, a Soviet scientist during the Cold War reverse engineers a UFO. In his final days, he passes his manuscript down to his daughter Natalia and son-in-law Gene Sticco. They, along with co-author Mario Fiallo, translate this and compile a book in what could be a groundbreaking first on how UFO operate. Well, folks, thanks for joining Massachusetts MUFON Mass Hysteria. We have a very interesting show today, and I'm your host, Jim Aurak, with Massachusetts MUFON. I'm a field investigator and also an MS in electrical engineering. And we have the authors of a very enthralling work that they have translated and editorialized and narrated and come up with a very enthralling, somewhat compelling narrative and story of a former Soviet scientist performing reverse engineering of a UFO or a UAP craft during the Cold War era between the United States and the Soviet Union. With us, we have Gene Sticca and Nat. How do you pronounce her middle and last name?
So Natalia, so it's her maiden name. It's Chernohaeva hyphen Sticko. She goes by
Okay.
Natalia Sticko now primarily, but for the book,
Okay.
I'm going to
Natalia Sticca.
yeah,
Okay,
keep that with
that's
her
good.
father. Yep.
Yeah, the middle name, the middle part of the last name is very important, as we'll get to. But the folks are going to tell us how they happened across this. Gene, something really fascinating about your background. When we first started speaking, I did a little bit of digging, and it turns out that you've done a lot. So maybe in a few minutes, you can explain why the heck you come across as better than the Great Gatsby, because
Yeah,
apparently you had a short run for president in 2024,
that's right.
and you were a staff sergeant in the United States Air Force, and you're involved in some intelligence operations. And then, as you explained, you had some sort of security intelligence firm during the Cold War era, and then you're involved in global security at Shell Corp, and that was actually at the time that was probably a groundbreaking story. And when I saw that, I'm like, oh my God, that must have been humongous news at the time, and that delves into all sorts of things with corporate greed and so forth. And folks out there that may remember Gene, you might say, "Oh, that's the whistleblower." I'd like to start a paradigm shift, and I don't know if it's possible, but I would like to take the term whistleblower, which a lot of times that has negative connotations, and most of the time, such a person is actually a kind-hearted, good person trying to do the right thing, the ethical thing, and a good thing, yet they get blacklisted from industry. Way back in the day, I graduated with my bachelor's from UMass at Lowell before I went to Texas Tech. That was in '93, and we had Roger Boschili, the whistleblower for the Space Shuttle Challenger, and so he had told the contractor at the time, "Look, there's a problem with an O-ring. Let's stop this." So they temporarily stopped. They went on. Unfortunately, there was a horrific disaster. Our astronauts burnt up, and they even said, "Oh my God, we're burning up." And that gentleman who had done a lot, and top-notch, world-class engineer, got blacklisted from industry, couldn't get a job, so he went around to all universities I had attended at the time, and he was termed whistleblower. Whereas the paradigm shift that I'd like to change is, why don't we just call them key witnesses? Because if you have somebody who's a key witness to something that was crucial, that's, oh, they were very credible and they made a positive impact. So what do you have to think about all that, starting with way back from your U.S. Air Force, the great Gene Gatsby, let's say.
Well, very kind. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's when you sit back and well, when you hear somebody talk about it, I certainly realize I've been in a lot of extraordinary situations, and I credit it to a couple of things. My grandmother when I was leaving for the military said, her advice is the key to success was, pay attention to the people who are better than you are and follow them. The other more simpler version is always be ready to say yes. And I said yes a lot, and it took me a lot of interesting places that I'm truly looking back, blessed to have been, and I think really developed a lot of the character traits, let's say, that ultimately led to the situation you're referring to that kind of got me whistleblower status. Um, and just to follow on from what you were saying about the Columbia incident, the work that when I was inside the oil and gas industry, safety, is paramount in that field. And they often referred back to that engineer. They referred back to the Columbia disaster, as one of those missed opportunities, as an example of, the need to empower people to say no and empower people to put stops to things, regardless of the consequences. So, I appreciate you touching on that and covering that. Yeah, background wise, like you mentioned, I started out after high school in 1990. I went right into the U.S. Air Force. I was a member of, at the time, it was called Security Police, but Security Forces. Um, Had a great career through there, again, raising my hand a lot and saying yes to different assignments. I've deployed in most of the top events of the early 90s, partly Desert Storm, Bosnia, Somalia. Those are a lot of the key activities that were going on during that period, that I got engaged when. And later, into 1999 is actually when I left. I reached that point of that decision point. If you do 10 years, you might as well do the other 10 years and retire. And the opportunity presented itself for me to move into the private sector, in the oil and gas field, doing security for a drilling company that was actually based out of Houston, Texas, but their whole C-suite was in northern New Jersey, which is where my last station was at McGuire Air Force Base. And that led on the road to a couple of things. Number one, working inside the industry, but also opened up opportunities to become a contractor working with a lot of government agencies, primarily in the one that I worked with the longest, that was sort of interwoven, let's say, between the oil and gas industry and government was with the CIA. So essentially, for 17 years, I worked inside the oil and gas industry, but doing a lot of work on the side, and a lot of crossover, let's say, between that. And in between, there was stints with Department of Energy. There was Department of Homeland Security post 9/11 as that was created. We worked closely with the team that was developing the organization. They were in temporary offices in McLean, Virginia, and all the rest of it. That opened doors to meeting, Senate staffers and congressional staffers all around the House as well, in helping them understand a lot of the risks and whatnot of the industry.